Morning. I'm Rona Cohen, and thank you for joining us for day 2 of Carbon Sequestration from the Ground Up, Opportunities in Northeastern Farms and Forests. I manage our Energy and Environment program at CSG East, and we are really proud to be co-sponsoring this event with Scenic Hudson. We had some really terrific discussions yesterday, and we have a very exciting program scheduled for today. So I'm so glad that we have so many people joining us today. We have about 170 people or so signed up for this event. So really looking forward to the conversations that we're going to be having. I just wanted to give a shout out to my 2 colleagues who have been doing a really fantastic job on the technical side of things to make sure that our programming runs smoothly. And that's Jack Aitken and Allison Braver. Thank you both for all of your excellent support. So before we get into it, I just want to remind everybody that we're recording this event and it will be posted on our website early next week. And there will be a 5-minute break in between each session and ample time for Q&A. And we ask everybody that you please submit your questions through the Q&A box. You can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Okay, and so now I'd like to turn it over to Ned Sullivan, president of Scenic Hudson and our co-sponsor of this conference. Ned, over to you.
Thank you, Rona, and thank you for the pivotal role that you have played in orchestrating this event, and to Andy Bicking, who served as your colleague in doing that from Scenic Hudson. So good morning, and thank you for returning to day 2 of carbon sequestration from the ground up. It's a beautiful day in the Hudson Valley, and I have the privilege of looking out on a green field and grazing animals of a permanently protected farm in northern Dutchess County with a Catskill Mountain backdrop, a reminder of one of the many co-benefits of conserved farmland, its inspirational beauty. Yesterday, we heard from Dr. Sasha Spector about the vital importance of our shared mission to urgently advance natural climate solutions. The opportunity to both eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector and to take carbon out of the air and fix it in plants and soils, a true win-win. One factoid that stuck with me is Sasha's finding that if fully implemented, natural solutions could remove the equivalent of all greenhouse gases from internal combustion vehicles from the roads of the United States. Did everybody hear that? Did everybody get that? Pretty amazing. We also heard from Jen Phillips about the role of the US Climate Alliance in working with states to keep them on track to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. Coincidentally, on day 2 of President Biden's Earth Day summit with world leaders to rekindle commitments to this urgent global compact. Both Sasha and Jen agreed that our #1 priority should be protecting the forests of the Northeast to sustain their crucial role in sequestering carbon. We heard from legislators and research scientists about the importance of soil health and of legislative initiatives that are in the works, and the importance of reviving the National Soil Monitoring Network of the NRCS. We heard about Vermont's Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, a potential model for the region for payment for practices initiatives. We heard about the national rollout of the Family Forest Carbon Program and about the game-changing tree equity program in urban neighborhoods, and a tool used to measure both carbon, energy, other environmental and health benefits from urban trees. And we heard from Brianna Alfaro about steps we can take to overcome the cultural and other obstacles to Black, Indigenous, people of color farmers in gaining access to and ownership of land and the resources needed to shift to regenerative farm practices. So I'm very excited to hear from today's presenters and honored to turn the program over to my esteemed co-host, Senator Mark Pacheco from the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who will initiate the first panel to address this last issue. Senator Pacheco.
Well, thank you very much, Ned. And let me just begin by just saying what a great opportunity this conference has been, and the wonderful work that Scenic Hudson and all of your team has provided. And in particular to Rona Cohen from CSG and all of her team internally, and the fantastic work they continue to do for all of us in the legislature, giving us the opportunity and continuing to provide us additional education as we move forward doing our job in our respective states. As the Northeast Carbon Alliance has done, an initiative that Ned worked so hard on, we have created an alliance as well in CSG, the CSG State Legislative Climate Alliance for legislators. And it's going to be so important as we move forward, as we see what has happened with the U.S. Climate Alliance, with the governors, with the big cities across America, that in order to have laws passed, obviously we not only need the executive branch, but our legislative branch to be involved. And one of the issues that we're all going to be dealing with, and we're trying to be very involved with, is the whole issue of the intersectionality with climate in the middle of all the other issues that are taking place. And that's what our next panel will really be talking about. The panel will kick off a discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion in agriculture. And it's going to be so important as we move forward to get this right. And the moderator for that panel, and I spoke with him before we kicked off the meeting, and he indicated he doesn't like to have his bio read in full. But I must tell you, when I read his bio, I am taking the privilege of reading it to everyone, because he is just an amazing, such an amazing background. Chris Rabb is a father, an educator, an author, a consultant, and a member of the Philadelphia House of Representatives, representing approximately 65,000 people in the upper Northwest Philadelphia area. Representative Rabb is a thought leader at the intersection of politics, media, entrepreneurship, and social identity, while a visiting researcher at Princeton University. Rabb wrote the groundbreaking book, Invisible Capital, How Unseen Forces Shape Entrepreneurial Opportunity, in 2010, which addresses modern US entrepreneurship through the lens of structural inequality. In 2018, Representative Rabb successfully created the first of its kind equity committee within the Pennsylvania House Democratic Caucus, and is its founding chair, which evaluates and makes recommendations regarding social equity issues related to policy, membership, personnel, legal, procurement, communications, and appropriations. Representative Rabb has been a fellow at Demos, the Poynter Institute, and the German Marshall Fund of the United States. He is a graduate of Yale College and the University of Pennsylvania. It's my honor to turn it over to our friend and moderator for this next panel, Chris Rabb.
Senator, most of what you read is true. It's always hard listening to one's own bio. I never get used to it. But I thank you for handing it over to me, and for this honor of talking with colleagues of mine who are actually leaders in this field on such an important issue. I also want to thank Ned Sullivan, and I must say that the thing that I am most proud of, other than being a father and a public servant, is my lifelong avocation as a genealogist and family historian. And you should know, Ned, that my ancestors were enslaved in Dutchess County. They worked for one of the richest, most patrician families in American history, the Livingstons. And they came from Jamaica. They were agricultural workers. They were on sugar plantations in Port Maria in St. Mary Parish, and they were brought over as a wedding gift to the Livingstons. And so my ancestors were enslaved in Dutchess County on land that was stolen from indigenous people. The Livingstons owned 1 million acres, 1 million acres over a period of a couple of generations through the British Crown. And they said, if you could kill off the indigenous people and you can conscript enough Irish and German folk who were not considered white back then, it's yours. And they did fabulously well. So I have a very interesting connection to the land and to our nation's troubled history, but I also see hope. I also see hope. And part of that is by talking with folks who understand this issue and its complexity and potential solutions, particularly as it relates to policy. The first of the two gentlemen I'd like to introduce is Professor Gerald Torres. He is a professor of environmental justice at the Yale School of Environment and a law professor at Yale Law School. Professor Torres is one of the leading American scholars in environmental law, natural resource management, and Native American tribal lands. It's a pleasure to have you, sir. I have many more questions than we have time for. I also want to introduce our esteemed panelist, Dr. Ali Ferris. Dr. Ferris is an endowed professor of water security and water energy food nexus in the College of Agriculture and Human Sciences at the esteemed HBCU, Prairie View A&M University. And Dr. Ferris is an expert in the water energy food nexus, water security and climate change impacts on agriculture, natural resources, and the environment. If I read both of your bios, which are far more extensive and far more impressive than mine, we'd have no time to talk. And I want to give you as much time to share your treasure as possible. So let me just start out. There are a lot of big words in there. And if there are legislators watching, that's not helpful because we like smaller words, you know. But I just want to start off by asking, I want to know how your career has influenced your thinking around providing access to resources to Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities as it relates to restorative agriculture. So maybe if we can just back up for a sec and reintroduce the notion of regenerative agriculture. What does it mean? Why is it important? And how we process it in the context of equity. Let's see. Professor Torres, would you like to start us off?
I was going to say, I don't know what order.
Yeah, go for it.
What order we're going to go in, but
yeah.
One way to think about regenerative agriculture is to contrast it to the idea of agriculture as an extractive industry. That is something that just takes from the soil, as opposed to starting with the soil. And Dr. Ferris, who's a soil scientist, can back me up on this. Treating the soil as the fundamental resource, obviously with water, but as the fundamental resource about which we need to pay attention, because without paying attention to it, the number of inputs that we have to add to the agricultural processes, both has detrimental environmental impacts. It also it affects the cost curve in the industry. And it's important to remember that farmers have to make a living, right? And so one ways to think about regenerative agriculture is both from an environmental perspective, but also from an economic perspective. That is, how can we get a hold of the cost side, since farmers by and large are price takers, and being able to manage that side of the equation is actually really critical. I will say, and a point of pride for me, and I know pride is one of the 7 deadly sins, so I hesitate. But I think I'm the first person in American legal education to offer an agricultural law class in a major American law school about 30 years ago. And it struck me that lawyers need to pay attention to the rules that govern agriculture. And so that started me out on that path. One of my students went on to head the Farmer Legal Action Group, and one of her main tasks before she left that to go back into private practice was to figure out how to get new farmers on the land. And for her, new farmers in Minnesota, this was in Minnesota, it meant farmers of color as well as immigrants. And so cracking that nut is actually critical. Another colleague of mine, a classmate of mine from law school, actually spent the first part of his career focusing on land recovery for Black farmers who'd been essentially deprived of their land in the South. So that's kind of one side of the background. The work I've done with tribes has focused on kind of, in some ways, bread and butter issues for them, which center around jurisdiction, but they also center on managing resources and threading the jurisdictional needle, as it were, to make sure that they have the adequate capacity to manage those resources. The forest resource for a lot of tribes is actually profound. And so when you think about managing the forest resource for climate, what you have to do is a couple of things. One is, first of all, you need to recognize, and I think you did that in yesterday's discussion, the importance of the forest resource for sequestering carbon. But you also have to recognize that it's a resource that has to generate income for these nations. And so it's not just a carbon sink for the rest of us. It's a carbon sink, but it's a carbon sink that also has to pay. And so here I would point to the models, and then I'll shut up because I know we only have about 10 minutes. We can look at the models in agriculture. So remember when non-point source water pollution was a big issue, and one of the agriculture, of course, is the largest contributor to non-point source water pollution. So one of the things they had to do was to figure out how to manage vulnerable land, or land that would contribute most to non-point source water pollution. And they created Swamp Buster and Sod Buster. I don't know how many of you remember those programs managed by the USDA. But what it did, and Minnesota provides another example here, because what Minnesota did is it managed hedgerows and grassland, cropland that bordered streams to keep them out of cultivation, and to manage them so that they would produce wildlife that hunters would like to hunt. And so they tied in the duck stamp program, that is the licensing program for hunting fowl, into the payments for farmers to manage the land, because they're taking it out of agricultural production, but creating value for others. So we need to think along those lines. And in the hard sciences right now, when they're thinking about climate change, one of the paths they're taking is biomimicry. How to create processes that mimic the ordinary natural processes. Well, that's important. But the point you made, Representative Rabb, is critically important, which is we have the resources there that can sequester the carbon. Let's figure out a way to maximize the sequestration through the natural process that we already have. And so the work I'm doing with tribes and managing forest resource focuses on the intersection of the need to continue to generate income and the maximization of the capacity to sequester carbon. So I'll just leave it there for now, and I'll be happy to answer questions and talk
Thank you.
further.
Thank you, Dr. Ferris. What did you, I want to let you make your case, but what did you hear that resonated with you most from your colleague?
What resonates with me, first of all, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel and talking to this esteemed group. So I feel honored. I think to answer your question, what made sense to me and what really I agree completely with all what he said there is the notion that regenerative agriculture is not only profitable, or it's environmentally profitable, it's economically, it's the right thing to do. And I think if we can go, from my perspective, if we can go back a little bit and say, what is the status of the environment right now, of the soil, for instance. According to the FAO right now, 33% of the Earth's arable soils are degraded. And if we continue the same business as usual right now, by 2050, 90% could become degraded with how many 2 billion people are coming. So it looks that doing business as usual is not gonna take us there. So we need to rethink the way we have been doing business in agriculture. And so regenerative agriculture is what has been done for centuries before us. So it's not something new. It's something that has been sustained for centuries, where you have basically the animal, you have the plants, you have the protection of the environment that are all in one unit. So doing this integrated approach, system approach, as some people call it, to reconcile the need of producing adequate nutritious food with the necessity of restoring the environment, making farming solution to the environment issues. So it's really, they go hands in hands. So that's, the work we have been doing, for instance, I've been working when I was, before Prairie, I was at the University of Hawaii. We used the watershed approach. What we say, what happens in the upper part of the watershed influence the people who are in the middle, influence the people who are in the mouth of the watershed, also influence the ocean too, because coral reefs and other entities have been suffering because of the inland activities and erosion that is occurring. So protecting that environment in the upper part of the watershed can help everybody. So we are in on this together as a unit. So what you do and what I do are all connected.
Well, speaking of connection, Professor, I wanted to ask, you were at a historically Black university. And a lot of these universities are land grant universities, where the land is provided by government to establish institutions of higher learning, and specifically to address long-standing exclusion from that upward mobility, which includes work in the agricultural sphere. How do you see equity as it relates to institutions to which you are both connected? So we have a gem in a HBCU, which you are connected with. We also have an elite institution among the Ivy League that Professor Torres is currently associated with. What are the responsibilities institutionally in the work you do as it relates to regenerative agriculture, issues around equity, from your standpoints? Because we all have different forms of occupational prestige on this panel, all of us. What is our responsibility to acknowledge that history, acknowledge the privilege that we have access to, to do exactly what Professor Torres actually did 30 years ago by creating a whole new practice, a whole new area of learning that otherwise would not have just, organically happened. Perhaps you had to make it happen, and you were able to legitimize that in a rarefied space, which made it easier for other institutions to follow suit. So, Dr. Ferris, how do you feel your connection to Historically Black University relates to this subject?
Well, this is to the core of the mission of the institution, because the forefathers who created the land grant system, the Morale Act 1, 1862, and then the Morale Act 2 of 1890 that brought the 1890s institutions, which are HBCUs and agriculture. The mission of the land grant institution is basically to serve the needs of the citizen of each state. And particularly the HBCU is to serve the needs of the minorities, African American, and also the state. So relieving poverty, assuring food security, health security, all the aspects of life, the quality of life as we know it, are part of the mission of the land grant institution. So the responsibility are immense. How can we help these citizens who have needs? Like, let's say, for example, Prairie University is mandated to serve the needs of more than 8 million Texans who are limited resources, which is many than population of several states sometimes. An institution like this that has been for 143 years working to serve those needs in the forefront of educating the next generation, solving issue of food security, solving issues of water security, and all the aspects that livelihood of people are doing, has been and continue to be the main focus and day-to-day activity of Prairie View A&M University in the last 143 years of its existence.
Thank you. Professor Torres, same question from a very different perspective.
Well, one of the things that I have I would say the privilege and in some ways the luxury of being able to do is to have convenings and bring people together. So over the last 3 days, Yale co-sponsored the Indigenous Nations Climate Change Summit with Cornell University, which has, of course, is also a land grant university, even though it's an Ivy League school, land grant university, and the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program of Cornell. So what we did is we brought people from around the country to address this issue, and the people we highlighted in one part of the program probably would be better here today than I am, because they talked about regenerative agriculture in the context of tribal agriculture, and they made the same point that Dr. Ferris made, which is rather than thinking of it as something new, right? It's important to put it in the context of things that have historically been done, and to reclaim those pathways. So the first thing I can do is to create spaces for these issues to be discussed. One of the things I'm doing at Yale is creating a center for environmental justice between the law school and the School of the Environment. Our first task, at least the first task I started for us, was not to convene the people who are studying this inside the academy, but to reach out to the communities who are actually doing the work and speaking with them across the state and across the region, so that I and the people who are going to do research can think about the way they think about environmental justice, the way they think about land issues, the way they think about, you raised this issue earlier, urban forests issues, and the impact of maintaining green cover in cities for three big reasons. One, for the impact on heat and the impact on air quality. And the thing that almost no one talks about, right, is the impact on mental health. One thing that people have recognized is that access to natural spaces actually improves the mental health outlook for people who have that access. Some of us take it for granted. It's important for us to work backwards to those communities who've been deprived of that access to figure out ways to improve it. And so from the advantage of being at a place like Yale, and I will concede, is that I have the capacity now to bring people together and to get people talking about issues that they might not otherwise talk about, and to give a space for the excluded voices to actually speak. And I think that's really important.
These are all great points. And so much of what I hear lends itself to a communal lens, how not individual farmers, individual policy experts, but whole communities can decide what environmental justice looks like to them, what ancient wisdom as it relates to regenerative agriculture makes sense in their space in the world. And it was also referenced earlier about this is not just for environmental sustainability, but sustainability of whole communities, which necessitates an economic consideration. And so as someone who is 6 generations college educated in my family with very little financial wealth, despite that formal education, and far less land ownership than my ancestors had 100 years ago, right? This is a systemic issue. What are the opportunities to allow for those communities who have been marginalized, where policies and such have been created to estrange them from the land that they've known for generations, to reacclimate them and to, essentially provide access to agricultural opportunities in the land itself in ways that that has not happened in a very long time. What are some strategies or recommendations you can think of? And perhaps it can start with institutions beyond government. It could be an educational institution, could be nonprofits, whatever. But how do we get to a point where we can reclaim what was lost and take advantage of the science and the technology, in addition to the ancient wisdom around what we need to do moving forward? Either one.
Let me just say what's going on in New Haven right now, because one of the things that's happening is there's some of my colleagues at the School of the Environment are working with groups in New Haven to do a couple of things. One is to promote urban farming. Two, to reclaim or develop parkland within New Haven, right? And to connect people in New Haven who, even though we're a coastal community, people don't think of it as a coastal community, drawing those people back to the coast to understand that link. And part of it, they view it, the people I've talked to, and Gather New Haven is one of them, the people I've talked to view their work not just from an environmental perspective. Okay, they recognize their environmental benefits to the community, but also to the broader community in that sense. But they also view it as a way to interrupt pathways that would lead some of the young people, right, into unprofitable futures. Let me put it that way. So that's really important. The second thing, and I've got to go read your book, because I really recognize, and back, I'm older than all y'all, so but back when I was doing civil rights work, one of the issues that I thought would get traction but really didn't, and that was this issue. It was access to capital as a civil rights issue, right? Because in fact, if you're going to fund the reclamation of farmland or make farmland available or get people on farm, you've got to have access to capital. And so we need to start talking about financial systems as well as natural systems, and to understand the link between those two. I also want to say, and Dr. Ferris undoubtedly already knows this, but if I could put us all on a plane right now and fly us over out to Arizona, we could look down at the Hopi land that has been farmed continuously for 2,000 years, right? You look at these green spaces in the desert, right? This isn't modern technology. They know how to do this, and we could learn from them.
So there's a certain humility involved in our progress.
No kidding.
That is such a great point. Dr. Ferris.
Thank you. I think, first of all, there is something important right now. We have to stop the bleeding, because right now some loss of African-American lands is very alarming, at alarming rate. So I think the first thing is, what can we do to stop that? There are some challenges facing land owners and forest owners and agriculture farmers in the African-American community. So that would be, I think, the first strategy is how can we stop that? And then the second is how can we go to really recruit new young people, to motivate them, to make agriculture attractive to them, agriculture, food, connect them back with their food, connect them back with their water sources, connect back them with their air quality and other sources that really influence their day-to-day life. So land-grant institution can play a good role here, can play a vital role, because based on their mission, the 1890 institution can and have been and we can strengthen their role in this regard, in connecting people and working with and seeing what is the major cause of this losses of farmers. And I like Professor Torres mentioned about capital. Access to capital has been historically a problem for African American, from institutions who don't lend them, from paperwork, from being certain challenges that have been facing them. So addressing those challenges really a key in putting us back into the right track. And I'd like to say that this climate change offers an opportunity of lifetime to change certain things and to make corrections and to really do things the right way, and to not only for the environment, but also equally important for the citizens and for the minority too.
Well, I want to take this moment to recenter this conversation, because this is the Council of State Governments, and you are at a land-grant university, historically Black college in a massive state. Your responsibility is not just to African Americans, to your students, but to the entire state. And I'd mentioned also that kind of my ancestral roots in various states. All 16 of my great-great-grandparents were born into states across as far south as Mississippi to as far north as New York, and they were all born into slavery from south to north, all because of state law, state laws that allowed to determine who owned property and who could go into what professions. Even today, you cannot grow certain plants if you have a drug conviction. So you cannot grow medical cannabis in Pennsylvania if you have a drug-related crime, even though there are people who are making money off of it now, growing far more and selling far more than anything that put that young African-American man into prison in the first place. I say that to say, you've mentioned about access to capital, you've mentioned about institutions that are furthering what can be done. We've talked about leveraging the ancient wisdom of folks who've been doing this literally for millennia. And my ancestors were brought here as enslaved laborers in agriculture who have no access, even today, in any meaningful way. If we could leave, because we only have 5 minutes left, I knew this would go quickly. If you could suggest one concrete thing, and remember, we're doing it in the context of states. So this is folks in the executive and legislative branches primarily. What can you tell folks who are policy shapers in their respective states, particularly here in the Northeast, the East Coast? One thing that you think would be meaningful?
Professor Torres, go ahead, please.
No. I was going to say, try to limit it to one thing. I mean, that's the task, right? One of the reasons I pointed to the effort in Minnesota is that was a state program that looked to tie two interests together in order to produce a benefit actually for everyone. So, one of the things that has to occur is a way to use the carbon sequestration capacity of forests to provide income, right, to the people who are managing that resource for all of our benefits. So if I were going to ask the state legislators to think about one thing, that's the general topic. The specific topic could be, look, let's look at management of offsets. And to what extent should the state government offset its carbon use with the carbon sequestration efforts? Let's then target those carbon sequestration efforts to do one of two things. One, to target the land that is owned by indigenous or marginalized communities, one, or to set up a fund which can then be used to finance access to these resources, which are ultimately going to produce benefits for all of us. So that would be the one thing. It's
excellent. Thank you, Dr. Ferris.
I echo Professor Torres' suggestion, and I say that New York's Climate Leadership Community Protection Act is really a good example that can be emulated, because once you have that type of funding that is going to be a continuous supporting this activity, you can create centers of excellence in these HBCUs that really would work on extension, teaching, and research on how to get Black farmers and how to get younger generation involved in agriculture and so on. So it's proliferation of the benefits of such an initiative that can basically be practical, because anyway we're going toward this way, and the only way to get people involved is there is some secure funding that will allow them to do what they want to do and to support education, teaching, extension, and innovation, entrepreneurship. All those can be under those particular umbrella.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to underline that point. The Justice 40 initiative with the Biden administration has proposed, and which the New York legislation has in it, is something that state governments could look to and ask, how do we ensure that the benefits of the environmental protection that we are attempting to create actually flow back to these communities? And attention to that would be really important.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much. This has been enlightening. I knew it'd go by very quickly. I could do this for hours more. I'm sure our audience feels the same. And I hope that this is just the beginning of conversations online, offline. And ultimately, if we're going to do this, we have to embrace shared prosperity. We have to embrace social equity, systems thinking, and also acknowledge the ancient wisdom of our ancestors who have been doing this all along, but have been estranged from their own traditions and resources through no fault of their own. So I want to thank Dr. Ferris, Dr. Torres, and also I want to thank the Council for State Governments. This was a great opportunity for me to be re-engaged and to be part of something that I will not soon forget. So we have to end now, and we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.